I'm Andrea Brunet, and I'm here with Hal Gibson, my husband, to talk about from his perspective what it was like when Jessie Ray Lewis came into our lives. Jessie Ray was a 19-year-old, aged-out foster child, and Hal, why were you so empathetic when you first met him?
Well, he's a personable young man, for one thing. I realized that he didn't have that example in his life on how a man should behave and treat other people. And I just thought that there was a possibility I might be able to give him some direction and help, show him how important it is to have some kind of direction. He had a decent attitude that he agreed with the rules that he was going to have to live to. And so I found that it was easy. He's easy to talk to. He's easy to have a conversation with.
But at first, the only rules were the ones that we set, just three. No drugs, you have to work, and you have to go to school. It was only later that you told him to keep the apartment, or the safe house as we called it, clean. So what were some of the expectations that you set for him?
Taking care of the place, cleaning up after yourself, hygiene, getting a shower, keeping the kitchen clean, putting your food away, setting an alarm and getting up at a certain time. He didn't know how to set an alarm, so that's one of the things that I had to show him before I could get him to understand that he had to have a certain time that he got up and a certain time that he went to bed.
Even those basic guidelines were too much for him, apparently. You had to stay on him all the time. So, what did that do to your everyday life?
At that point, it did become a little overwhelming. I had to reevaluate everything and decide how much effort I was going to have to put into this, realizing that just being kind of a fill-in in the morning and the evening was not going to be enough. He was going to need someone to be on him 24/7. And so that's when I realized this might have been a little more than I wanted to bite off and chew on.
Originally, you were going to keep trying to do your own work, which was a construction project to get the rest of the house up and running so that we could rent it out. Jessie Ray lived in the lower story, and you were still working on the upper story. But then you started to realize that you would really have to give up most of your work to stay on him. What made you realize that you couldn't do both?
He wasn't a self-starter, so someone had to go over there and knock on the door. And even though he let the alarm ring till it wouldn't ring anymore, that discipline wasn't there. That was the thing that I realized the most, was he lacked discipline. He had no organization in his life at all. He just did what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. And if my rules didn't fit within his agenda, then they didn't get done. And that was probably the most frustrating thing, is the amount of time that it took out of just an ordinary day of knocking on the door, getting him up, making sure he got dressed and brushed his teeth and everything. He didn't take care of his clothes. His clothes were always laying around in piles. So yeah, there was a lot of things that changed after that first few weeks.
So, how did you try to instill better habits in him?
Well, I guess the first thing we had to do was make a list what he had to do each day, which the first thing is when the alarm goes off, you got to get up. So I took the alarm away from his bedside and put it across the room on a desk, so he'd have to get up and turn it off. But that didn't work too well either. So the thing that really worked was I would just go down there at 8 o'clock when he was supposed to get up and wake him up along with the alarm.
What made you realize you'd pretty much have to give up your own work to focus on Jessie Ray?
He did have a way of selling himself at the moment, but when you told him what he had to do to correct certain issues, there was always, oh yeah, I got it. Okay, yeah, I understand. I didn't realize I was supposed to do it that way. So that was one of the most frustrating things, is the daily denial of not knowing how to accomplish the tasks that he was given, even after you went over it more than once.
So he'd supposedly buried this gun on the property of the abandoned house where he'd been living before he came to the Bluefield Union Mission for help. Why didn't you go back to look for it?
Growing up in a family of gun owners and being trained by my grandfather, who was an NRA instructor, there are different things and different nomenclatures of how you disassemble a weapon, and I just didn't get that feeling that he was that knowledgeable on handling a gun. I figured that made sense that if you were carrying arms and you wanted to get out of your gang and you were wanted to do it gracefully with the blessing of the gang, then you had to follow their rules. And I understood that that was part of the leaving in good standing was to get rid of everything that had to do with that, anything that might be incriminating, which would include a gun. As time went on, I didn't know whether I really believed that was something that actually happened.
So when he was talking about guns, he didn't know what he was talking about.
Well, he knew where the trigger was, and he knew where the safety was, and he knew how to put bullets in it. It just didn't ring true. I started taking everything in and analyzing it a little more carefully and deciding what to believe and what not to believe.
At some point, after you'd spent some days and many hours talking with him, you drove him to his Narcotics Anonymous meetings every night, counseled him, helped him get food stamps and medical benefits. And one night he said, "Man, I think I love you." That meant a lot, didn't it?
Yeah, as time went by, I thought that the relationship was getting pretty nice to where there was a mutual respect. It was a surprise. I wasn't expecting it.
What was it that drew you to him and made you want to help him?
I guess my whole expectation anyway was that there would have been some kind of a relationship that was formed where trust and truthfulness and trustworthiness, being dedicated to your job that you were supposed to do. I was hoping that some of those disciplines that I held would also rub off on him through example. And so it was important to me when I started telling him, you have to watch your language around people. You don't talk like you're a gang member. You don't dress like you're a gang member. And those things I thought would rub off over time, which I thought they did. I picked up some good cues that he practiced when we were, like if he said F or whatever, I said, watch out what you're saying there. And over time, that became something that he responded to it by saying, "Oh, yeah, I got that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that," or whatever.
So your frustrations began to mount when you'd explained to him that you considered certain things an affront, like his expecting you to wake him up instead of getting up when the alarm rang, or when he let the apartment get really filthy.
Every day was a constant up and down. There were some highs and a lot of lows. By the time you dealt with those throughout the day and said, now, you realize what you did there was not right. And what have we discussed that we should do to change that? And those are the kind of conversations that went on throughout the day. And then I get reports that he wasn't doing things right at the mission where he was working. And then I would see with my own eyes that there was food all over the floor in the kitchen. He hadn't put anything away. He continued to eat food around the computer when I told him not to. So there was those issues every day, and it was mostly because I think he just got to the point where he didn't care. That was something that we learned over time too, that he realized that getting his life in order was a lot harder than selling drugs and hanging around those kind of people.
Do you remember the first time you saw that he had pretty much trashed the safe house?
I walked over one morning to wake him up, and I found food thrown all around the apartment and just a total mess. I hadn't gone into the bathroom before to find out that they were urinating on the walls and the floor, and it was pretty disgusting. The shower was filthy. Went from a brand new apartment with everything sparkling clean and in order to devastation, really. Clothes everywhere, food everywhere, chewing gum on my floor, just total disarray. It was above and beyond what I would expect from anyone. I could understand if you were, that's the way you lived in your own house. But when you were depending on someone else's roof and food and transportation and money, then I expected a lot more than that.
But you didn't blow up at him. You were careful about your response.
I didn't want to let him know that I was angry with him. I knew that everyone that had anything to do with his upbringing had been angry at him all his life, so I didn't think that was going to accomplish anything.
One day you found wadded up scraps of paper on the floor, and you discovered that he'd been writing, and then he was wadding it up and basically throwing his thoughts away.
I realized that he was writing his thoughts down on how he was feeling and expressing himself through writing. And when I saw that, I thought, wait a minute, this is something you don't want to be throwing away. This is too good. I mean, later on in your life, you're going to want to look back on what you've written here. And not only will it help you, but it'll help other people that you might be helping at that point in time on how to express themselves, how to get that anger out without being physical about it, but using your mind and writing about it. Yeah, that was impressive to me. And from that time on, I approached you with the idea of having him write you the things on his computer rather than just scribbling it on a piece of paper.
It turned out that Jesse Ray would need permission to write poems about his gang life, or so he thought. So he called the gang leader, the man he called Rick, from the payphone down the street. I was shocked and I was even scared. Did you just take it in stride?
No, I wasn't happy about it at all. I wasn't so worried about me. I was more worried about you and what you were going to do if I happened not to be here one evening or something.
Did it make you look at Jesse Ray in a new way?
From then on, it was a totally different way of me looking at things in regards to him and his past. Obviously, he wasn't ready to change his life at all if he was still in contact and talking with these people.
You convinced him to go back to Marion County, Virginia to face a drug charge, and he ended up spending a few days in jail. But you still believed in him at that point. And you were happy to put many miles on the car and go back and forth and ultimately bring him back to Bluefield.
I was happy to go down and I thought maybe rescue him so he didn't run off with his gang of friends down there. So yeah, I was happy to go down and get him back up here and get him back to his meetings, get him back to work with the Union Mission. We got him ready for school and doctors, and all that stuff was coming up that he was going to have to do, and I didn't want jail to be something that interrupted that. So yeah, I was happy to go get him back here and get him going back to his programs.
He was so worried about losing touch with you, he actually carved your cell phone number into his flesh of his arm because he was afraid he'd forget it, especially if he was in jail for a long time. But he didn't have tools or anything else with him.
Although he did have a pen that didn't write, and I think that's what he scratched the numbers into his arm with.
What were the things that finally led you to think that we might not have a happy ending?
Not telling the truth about his work at the Union Mission, acting like everything was okay. Not following up with his doctor's appointments. I specifically helped him set up those appointments by phone and made sure that he talked to the people and got the times down and wrote it down on a piece of paper, which we then put on his calendar. And then when it got time for him to go, I asked him, well, did you go to the doctor yesterday? We had that all set up. And he would say, oh, was that yesterday? I mean, you have a calendar there and you have me reminding you every day, and to the day it's due, you're supposed to go. That morning you were reminded, yet you give me the excuse I forgot. So yeah, I got to the point where those situations were becoming too prevalent.
Jesse Ray had a strong sense of needing to respect the gang leader he called Rick and to respect his other gang members. And you explained to him that keeping the place clean and showing initiative and hard work at the Bluefield Union Mission was a way of exhibiting respect, but somehow that just didn't translate, did it?
One of the things I did every morning was that I expressed to him the importance of when you go and you work for someone who's actually paying and feeding you, paying for your room and board, and giving you clothes to wear, allowing you to wash your clothes and clean your clothes at their business. And then I expressed to you the importance of you don't need to be told what to do. You're a pretty smart individual. If you see trash laying around the outside of the building, get a bag and pick it up. Do things like that make you valuable to the Union Mission and an asset that they can use and say, hey, this ex-drug person here is now one of our biggest helpers. Oh yeah, I'm doing that, I'm doing everything right. I don't take too many cigarette breaks. And then I find out later that that was all a lie, that you just did whatever Jesse wanted to do and had no respect for them, which I felt myself.
As you reflect on it now, what do you think your role was in perpetuating his bad behavior?
I realized that I was a lot of the fault of why things didn't work the way they should have, that I could have put my foot down a lot earlier and I didn't. I wanted to let him know that not everybody is going to beat you and kick you out and do all these things, but I should have learned to have established the line in the sand. I should have established those and stuck to them and not deviated from them. In the long run, yeah, I was disappointed. I put a lot of time and effort in. I learned a lot, but still, it was disappointing that he had everything that he could have asked for and could have improved his life and just said, I'm not interested.
When we talked on the phone at night, because I was away in another city for most of the work week, I would chide you for coddling him, including the fact that you drove him everywhere instead of letting him walk or learn the bus system.
Partly my fault is that I enabled him a lot because of his past. And because of that, I didn't want to be the one that didn't show up to pick him up when I said I would and leave him untrusting of me. I should have been setting the rules and saying, this is the way you're going to be or else. I was too soft, that's for sure.
How did you feel about it all?
I walked side by side with him and took him in and wanted to show him the different ways of doing things, how you have to behave, how you have to organize your life. And in some respects, I let things slide that were against the rules that we set up and tried to keep pushing forward to show him the path that he should be walking. That meant giving up and sacrificing a lot of what he wanted to do. And in the long run, I was the one that was making the sacrifices and giving up everything, and it should have been the other way around.
What did you end up learning?
I'm not going to walk into that situation again. Even if he decided to come back and change his life, he'd have a lot harder time of it. I wouldn't put up with any of the situations I put up with last time.
Were you devastated when your efforts didn't bear fruit?
Yeah, I guess that's the whole point, is that you see his abilities and what he can do if he puts his mind to it. And it just hurts to see someone who has those abilities and abilities that are much better and more expressive than mine. His ability to write and to do things like that. I mean, it's a wasted mind. It's too bad.
You gave him a lot of yourself.
I was willing to open up and allow him and make excuses for him too. My excuses were, well, his brain's all fried and it's going to take a while for him to recoup from that. And those were things that I just learned by doing research and understanding that this was a totally different mind than you and I have. So I thought, well, maybe I should bend a little bit because of that. But whatever the reasons were, they weren't the right ones. And I see now that you really have to have a lot of tough love if you're going to deal with someone like that. And they have to follow the rules. And if they don't, then they have to go. Period. End of story.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. This has been Andrea Brunet and Hal Gibson. For more information, go to hillbillydrugbaby.com or read the books Hillbilly Drug Baby, The Story by Andrea Brunet, and Hillbilly Drug Baby, The Poems by Jessie Ray Lewis.